I'm Jill Connor. I'm a local art critic and curator, and I'm working on archiving non-represented art.
My name is Loren Munk. I am an artist and videographer. I've been covering the New York art scene now for about 30 years. I have a couple of YouTube channels, and I have over 1,000 videos dealing with the New York art scene over the last 12 years online.
Hi, I'm Omar Lopez Chahoud. I'm an independent curator based in New York City. I'm also the artistic director of Untitled Art Fair, and I'm very much interested in working in the context of Latin America.
Hello, my name is Nathalie Angles, and I am the executive director of an organization called Residency Unlimited, which, as its name indicates, is a residency program for international and local artists, and we are based in Brooklyn.
And I'm Cordy Ryman, and I'm an artist, painter, sculptor, and yeah, that's local. Yeah, I'm from New York.
Well, actually, I'll start out. One of the things that struck me was the request that we talk about things that kept our art fresh, or what were the fresh things in the art world. So I'll throw that out as a beginning.
I can answer that immediately. I mean, as a organization where we work with artists from all over the world, and there is of all different ages and with very different types of practices. So in terms of, as someone who's working in the art field, this continuous kind of flow of new artists that we work with for 2, 3, sometimes 6 months is really incredibly energetic and amazing.
Do you have a space that you
We do.
operate
We
with?
have a space in Brooklyn, in Carroll Gardens. We have quite a
that's
unique
my
space, in
neighborhood.
fact, inside a church, which is on the corner of President and Court Street. It's an old church building.
I know it well.
And we are in the nave with 60 feet
the
high
nave.
ceiling,
With
with
all
a
the
huge
naves.
stained glass window. And artists work there, but if they need their own studio space, we organize it outside.
Wonderful.
Because that's another topic.
How long have you been there?
Since 2010. And the organization was founded in 2009. So anyway, being able to work with so many different artists throughout the year, we have about 50 artists per year, is really, I think, an amazing way of keeping up to date with what's going on, not only in New York, but also internationally.
And you work with all kinds of artists, not just visual artists. You work with dancers, writers, poets,
mainly
musicians.
visual artists, but there's a lot of cross-disciplinary practices. So, it's really more for visual artists, but who have cross-disciplinary practices.
But one of the things Nathalie and I were talking about earlier was that Nathalie is very much interested also in bringing young curators to be in conversation as residents with the artists. And the conversation started basically because of my travel in Central America, which is an area that as a curator I have an extreme interest at the moment. And I encountered through a project that I did in Nicaragua, a young curator that is very much interested in doing a residency here in New York, a curatorial residency, to improve her English and to get a bit of experience as well. So it couldn't be a perfect match, a better perfect match than Residency Unlimited. So I right away, 2 days ago, I was writing an email to her. I'm going to talk to Nathalie so I can put you in contact. This would be a perfect match.
Because our role is also, within a residency framework, our role is to really support the artists and the curators in a very customized way. So each artist, each curator comes with a different project. They want to meet different kinds of people. So this customized support really defines our program.
Are there working spaces there, or is it?
It's a shared workspace.
Right.
And as I mentioned, if the artist has an individual studio practice,
Right.
then we organize studio space
Somewhere
outside,
else.
sometimes in other residency programs.
But then there's like an exhibition space where people can come.
We work
And-
in partnership that's another defining quality of Residency Unlimited, is that we work in partnership with many different organizations throughout New York, because the idea is to access resources and pull them together. And so it makes the experience of the residency all that more interesting in a city like New York, where there is so much going on. You know, we're not in the countryside where the artist can be, you know, reflective and have a wonderful studio.
Right.
You know, we are in New York City where you can have a wonderful studio, but where really it's about kind of getting engagement with the city and the multiple layers.
Well, for me, like when I was, I sort of grew up around a lot of art and all.
Not
of
that far away from here, right?
No,
This is your
right,
neighborhood.
This is my neighborhood. This is
your home village right here.
I have, you know, barely moved a mile. But when I was growing up, I grew up around a lot of artists and a lot of art, and these objects that were around had almost like a, I don't know, kind of living totemic quality to me. And I think that I sort of internalized that to some degree. And when I'm making work, my main goal is to make something viable, make some sort of thing like that is, make a thing that is like its own entity. And even though I know that it's not really a living thing, and I'm using this sort of abstract language, which is not quite connected to the real world. To me, they in my mind, these things are like living, kind of powerful things. And so when I'm working, it's just about trying to figure out different ways of making that sort of reanimation happen. And so it's process, you know, it's very process oriented. And I sort of have two different ways that I work. I mean, when sort of by default, I will always make small things and self-contained things. And then, so that's sort of one way. And then when I have a show or if I'm given a space, I will sort of approach that as I'll sort of approach the space as a kind of in a similar way that I would approach a painting and trying to figure out a way to animate that space or make something happen or make it feel alive. And then I guess sort of what's happened over time is like when I do things in spaces to make things seem alive, I use multiple components. And then after the show, those things seem dead.
Do you make things, or do you use already material that's found, or both?
I do both, but then I do a lot of sort of reusing of my own things. Like I will make, you know, if I'm given a space here, I will do something that will sort of goes up the wall and down this way, and
and that's
try to reactivate that. But then after the show is over, this thing is no longer alive, and so I'll chop it up and.
I would say your work is site sensitive, because you always think about the space, the architecture.
Yeah, that's
for the
good
space.
words. It's not it doesn't have to be
specific, but it's sensitive to the space. And not only that, I think of your work as a sculpture as well.
Yeah,
even though it is about painting, but it brings you into a whole different level when you see it. That is not just looking at a two-dimensional. I mean, we can argue painting is three-dimensional.
It's semantics,
because it is an object, but in your case, you really come off the wall in many situations. Yeah,
it's hard to come off totally.
And you also use like sometimes studio scraps. You don't just make like stuff to chop up and then put on something. You actually like will sweep up and like drop it.
Tell us, as a curator, what motivates you when you work with artists? Are you looking for something in particular, or are you looking to be surprised?
It's more like surprise. I'm trying to look at art by artists where the medium is so extenuated, or almost like it could break, or so you can tell they're really taking a risk at the composition that they're putting together, whether it be through kind of sound or light art, which is like non-object based art, or abstract art that is assemblage, collage, they're not the traditional flat 2D work.
Where have you curated shows for?
Gosh, let's see. I'm doing a curatorial collaboration now at the Lazy Susan Gallery on Henry Street in the Lower East Side with Brian Shevlin and Michael Sharp. And so we're each curating different shows, throughout the year. Lazy Susan idea. And then I'm sort of spacing on the other places I've curated because, Black and White Gallery way back in Brooklyn on Driggs, which is now, I think,
Sure.
condo building.
Tatiana, I know her well.
Yeah, M55, I curated there. The American Abstract Artists group, I curated a show up in Newburgh in 2005. Yeah.
So you were saying you're not interested in two-dimensional. Are you interested in video and photography?
Yeah, more like the mediums have sort of been cast aside as like craft, whereas
Okay.
it's actually is art. It's just it doesn't fit in with that sort of Greenberg paradigm. I guess you could say it's like the work that's in Inventing Downtown now is like everything that was below Midtown. So it's more like I'm interested in that kind of experimental performance-based stuff where it's not meant to be beautiful. It could fall apart, it's not meant to last forever. And if it does, yay,
Right.
So if someone was interested in this kind of art today, where would you go looking at it? Would you be looking around down here on the Lower East Side? Would you be in Bushwick? Is there some place where you see kind of a nexus of this type of work?
Well, it's sort of like migrated. Like first I would go to Williamsburg way back. Then I would go to Dumbo where Smack Melon is, and AIR Gallery. Then Chelsea had some really nice experimental, like independent galleries. And those are the kind of spaces I followed, and they kind of showed up in the Lower East Side. For
They
the
moved
past,
out of Chelsea,
5 to
yes.
10 years. So I sort of follow it wherever it goes.
Do you work independently and project-based?
Yeah, yeah. And I put together an online archive of artists who aren't represented, and I'm kind of glad I did because a lot of those artists don't have the studios where they had them when I met them, made their profiles. Some of them have moved out of the city. It's just kind of wild how things like that, the real estate market has just sort of pushed people
Have you noticed
away.
that a lot of the New York artists are now going to upstate New York?
Yeah,
A lot of them
yeah.
are settling there, 2 hours from the city, an hour and a half from the city, for many different reasons. I mean, Bushwick is not any longer, it's more expensive than Manhattan, the prices. So
Right.
they've been pushed out of those neighborhoods in Brooklyn that used to be more artist friendly.
Right.
It's a concern for me as a curator right now. I'm working with artists. That's why I think residencies are so important right now. And the more that happen, the better it will be because it allows that space for the artists to.
Especially in a very market-driven art world,
Right.
where there are very few organizations that actually support artists, meaning the process of being an artist.
Right.
So residency programs do that, and we don't have a financial interest in the ultimate product,
Right.
if there is one, and we don't really care if there isn't one, but it's really about, so if we work with artists, for example, who are very young, we will give them confidence in their artistic practice. If we work with an artist who's more mid-career, they will have very specific objectives that we can hopefully fulfill. So at different levels of the career, what we can do is to support the artists, and their objectives. So I agree with you, residencies are very important. And what about you? You've been following the art.
Actually, this whole subject that we're just talking about of the way that the art neighborhoods migrate, the way that the gallery scene sort of drifts from one neighborhood to another, the forces that sort of push these things around. That's basically what I've been studying and making paintings about, and a lot of the video I work kind of relates to. I've been fascinated with just the idea of how an art community forms. And once an art community forms, then you start to have a trail of art history that is kind of left. It's like a snail that leaves a little coat of slime, on a stone. But that's the way that we build culture. And I think a lot of people have just sort of been unaware, or maybe they're only peripherally kind of aware of this stuff, but in a lot of ways could be one of the more prime ways that culture is created and is recorded. And that's what a lot of the paintings that I've been doing for the last 20 years have been. I've done major pieces. As a matter of fact, I just finished a piece dealing with this neighborhood, which is kind of interesting. And maybe we can talk to Cordy a little bit about this, because you grew up in the neighborhood. But what a lot of people don't realize is that Washington Square was maybe one of the first places that there was kind of an art community in New York City, historically speaking. And to this day, there are still famous studios that are around the edges here. We're talking about the show, I was Inventing Downtown. It's at the Gray.
Yep.
In the 50s, right? 40-something.
Yeah.
Before that, we're talking about 1880s. Albert Pinkham Ryder had a studio around here. There was a building, I think it was on 10th Street, 58 10th Street, that was actually called the Studio Building, where a lot of the Hudson River School people had their studios, and it had a frame shop, and it had its little showrooms. And this is in like the 1880s, 1890s, and it was there until 1956.
Yeah, all up and down 10th Street was.
Right.
It was like that.
Well,
Big
and then you had what was known as the New York School, or Clement Greenberg kind of derided them and called them the 10th Street School, and that was on East 10th Street. Wonderful artists, William de Kooning, Alfred Jensen, Helen Frankenthalter, they all lived there. The point I'm trying to make is that a lot of times the reason that ideas get passed on, the way they get passed on, and you're talking about how you reach out to people and offer them opportunities or things like that, it's where you live. You happen to go to the same grocery store, you see a lady artist and you sort of go, gee, didn't I see you at the show at such and such? And the next thing you know, you're having a conversation. Then it's like, well, I was thinking about this, or I was thinking about that, come by the studio. You know, 20, 30 years later, this is a little note, a little sideline in art history.
So where is your studio?
My studio is in Red Hook, Brooklyn. This particular neighborhood started out as a place where there was a lot of artists back around the turn of the last century, and then at some point it became the place where the abstract expressionists or the New York School grew up. And at that point it sort of started to drift down into Soho. Soho became the center of the art world for a while. Then within a very short period of time it kind of vanished. Then back on East 10th Street you had the East Village art scene sort of took off in some of the same buildings or next door to some of the famous galleries. So, and then eventually the money part of it sort of went to Chelsea. Another part of it just ended up drifting across the bridge, the Williamsburg Bridge, to Williamsburg. That's become its own little world, and that's kind of moved on to Bushwick. You know, so all these things are just fascinating. And if you start to look at how the neighborhoods and these relationships form, they also ended up affecting the way and what we consider important as far as art history goes. So that's kind of what I'm
also, the
playing
neighborhoods change. The neighborhoods seem to change so much quicker now. I mean,
that's because
like
everybody's seen the process.
Williamsburg was cheap, and then overnight it was not. And then, you know, Greenpoint was cheap, and then overnight it was not. And then Bushwick was cheap, and overnight it's not.
Right.
And now there's very few places. And I think that residencies and sort of studio programs are the most important thing.
People are starting to come down to Chinatown, and more artists are telling me that they're finding a studio space below Chinatown.
Like in East Chinatown
here in Manhattan. At a much better price than what they can find in Brooklyn.
But even the much better price is not.
They're starting to be a more lively. I've been doing more studio visits in that area, and they're very happy, and they get these weird spaces, but it works for them also because the galleries are in that area now. In that, I'm talking about the East Village. PS 122 is going to reopen. That played a big role in the 80s and 90s. And now they're reopening. They're asking me to get involved in the first show that they do with the new gallery space. And I suggested to them, you need to do the next generation. So I invited 3 curators to collaborate with me to do something that brings the new generation of artists into the conversation, so they learn a little bit more about this history that you're talking about.
This is all about community, you know, and I think that is so important. And a lot of people, I don't think they teach it in schools. A lot of artists are very self-absorbed, very narcissistic. And I think one of the things, if I was to put out one message, it would be, you know, open your eyes and realize that you're all part of a little tribe. And most people don't care about that. And so maybe the only people that you're going to find that are going to care about it are the other members of the tribe, but it also puts a responsibility on you that you have to support everybody else. You have to look at what's going on. You have to talk about it, argue about it, do all the things that people do.
Jill, I'm glad to hear that you're supporting artists that perhaps it's a bit more difficult for them to be part of the commercial or the gallery system based on the work they make. From what you're telling us, it sounds like you're very much interested in work that within the tradition, let's say, of fluxus or...
Right, fluxus I love, yeah.
I can see that. Yeah. And was it a validation for you to see at MoMA a couple of years ago, the sound show, that was the first time for MoMA to mount?
That was very exciting. I mean, because it's just non-object based art. I have friends who make sound art, and they've spent careers trying to find collectors, and it sort of eclipses that entire dialogue. Unless you do like what Gary Hill does, where he does sound, video, motion sensitive, but it's still giving a representation to the viewer, not just this sort of ambiance,
No, it's fascinating, and now everybody's talking about just basically selling the right to a performance, which has been happening a lot lately. There is this new sort of collecting base that is very much into, and I'm saying this because I'm also involved. I'm involved in the not-for-profit, but also I'm involved with an art fair, which means that I happen to go from the commercial to the non-commercial, and I want to keep that balance because I couldn't go this way, because my trajectory as a curator is working with emerging artists and supporting them, and they need the support outside the gallery system, but I also understand how people are collecting now, and more collectors. I mean, video is not even an issue now. There's people been collecting video for a long time, but collecting performance and finding ways of collecting it is relatively new, but it's happening more and more collectors are looking into that and acquiring the right to performances.
Is it really that important to be fresh? Because you can have fresh crap. You can have fresh garbage. I mean, that was a famous song when I was growing up, So I think a lot of the emphasis on fresh is misplaced, I think, and maybe I'll be the grump here.
But I think that's a commercial. I mean, it's a term that's.
It is, and it also deals with fashion, which is
use that.
Is kind of if it's going to be fresh, that means that shortly it's going to be stale. So you get it fresh and then you throw it out. And
that's also part of the market.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
In the market.
So the more I thought about this, I said, maybe there's something that's more important than being fresh. How about being good? How about quality? And then I also thought back to Don Judd, probably one of your dad's friends. Yeah. And Don Judd even said, it's not even important the work is good. What's important is that it's interesting.
Yeah, that's
whatever that means. So we're talking about what do we look at that is, okay, it doesn't have to be fresh, doesn't even have to be good, but it should be interesting. And how do you kind of keep your interest going and looking at things that are interesting, especially, we're all pretty much involved professionally or semi-professionally in the art world. So we're like fishes that are constantly swimming in a world of cultural production. But how do you kind of find these things or look for areas that are interesting, that are different, that are kind of break out of, I think, and particularly in New York City, I think a lot of people end up living in bubbles. Yeah. Bubbles of their friends or bubbles of their aesthetic tastes or ideologies or whatever, political things. And in a lot of ways, and this is one of the things that I've tried to do, is to try to break out of all these bubbles some way. So probably about 30, 25 years ago, I started getting interested in outsider art. And at that point, people just going, hey, this stuff is crazy. Harry Darger, what? That's you don't even want to look at this guy was sick. He's up. And I'm looking at this and going, no, this is fantastic. This is great stuff. And so in that period of time, suddenly outsider art has become accepted and all these other things. And so I'm constantly having to look for these kinds of, these enclaves of unacceptable ideologies or ideas or bad taste or these other things. And I find it. I find a lot of bad stuff, but that's part of the joy of being out there. And it's important to look at the bad art as it is important to look at the good art. And then you make the decisions. The other thing is you end up, often if you stay in the business long enough, you end up changing your mind a lot. And things that you thought were horrible end up suddenly over time maybe becoming interesting. And then if you keep watching a particular artist, sometimes they start out and you go, this is bad, this stinks. But then over a period of time you say, hold it, something's happened, something has changed, this person has developed, or maybe my taste has developed and it's gone the other way. Or conversely, you can have people go, oh, dude, this is fantastic, this is great. And then over a period of time, you go, this stinks. This has become so boring, this has become so stale. You know, I shouldn't use the word stale. But so you end up changing, and that's kind of how I try to stay interested and engaged and excited about what I'm doing and what I'm looking at.
Yeah, that was good. I think you said it well. But I think it's a different for the marketplace and the galleries, and for the artist, it's a different question. I mean, I think when you're working in your studio, you have to, the work has to hold your own interest. For me, like it automatically. I just keep making things, and then it changes automatically in order to hold my own interest. As long as I don't overthink it or interfere with that process or start trying to get strategic, because it will. So I think for a practicing artist, you have to keep it fresh, or you might as well not do it. I don't have to do it.
Keep it interesting.